Most people believe their behavior is governed by values, beliefs, or conscious choice. We like to think that when we act, we're expressing who we are, what we believe, or what we've decided matters. That belief feels central to our sense of dignity. It reassures us that we are authors of our lives rather than passengers in them. But if you observe human behavior closely, especially under pressure, a different picture begins to emerge. Much of what we do is not chosen in the moment at all. It is discharged.
Hello and welcome to The Psychology of Us with Professor R.J. Starr, where we explore the mind's influence on life, relationships, and society. R.J. Starr is an existential psychologist, professor, and author dedicated to exploring the core challenges of human existence, how we find meaning, embrace responsibility, and navigate life's challenges. Known for a thought-provoking yet accessible approach, RJ inspires listeners to cultivate self-awareness, emotional intelligence, authenticity, and purpose. This podcast is designed for all psychology enthusiasts, practitioners, students, and anyone curious about why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. Each episode unpacks theories, explores complex questions, and offers insights that deepen understanding of the human experience. So settle in, stay curious, and discover the psychology of us.
Emotion does not simply color experience, it organizes behavior. Long before we decide what to do, emotion has already shifted our attention, narrowed our perception, and tilted us toward action. And when people struggle with regret, conflict, shame, or patterns they can't seem to break, the problem is rarely that they felt too much. The problem is that emotion moves straight into behavior without passing through awareness. This is the difference between reactivity and response, and it's one of the most important psychological distinctions we can make. Reactivity is not a personality flaw. It's not immaturity, weakness, or lack of intelligence. Reactivity is a nervous system state. It occurs when emotional activation bypasses reflective awareness and moves directly into action. The body detects threat, frustration, or urgency, and behavior follows automatically. There is no pause, no space, no authorship, just motion. In reactive states, people often describe feeling compelled. They say things like, I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop myself. I just had to say something. I needed to act. I couldn't let it go. And subjectively, this feels true. Reactivity does not feel reckless from the inside. It feels necessary. That's because reactivity narrows perception. When emotional activation rises quickly, attention collapses around the stimulus. The mind stops scanning for alternatives and starts orienting toward resolution. The world becomes simpler, sharper, and more urgent. Nuance fades. Time compresses. Doubt feels dangerous. Hesitation feels weak. And action feels stabilizing. This is why reactive behavior often comes with a strong sense of certainty. People feel justified, righteous, or self-evidently correct. It's that click in the mind where the world divides into heroes and villains, and you are certain that you're the hero under siege. We've all been there, holding the phone, thumbs hovering over a text, feeling that burning internal yes that says they need to hear this right now. That certainty is not wisdom, it's adrenaline talking. It's the sound of the door locking behind you. People are not lying about their experience. Their perception has genuinely shifted. In that state, the action they take feels like the only reasonable option available. What is lost in reactivity is not intelligence or morality. What's lost is choice. Choice requires space. Choice requires the capacity to feel emotion without immediately discharging it into behavior. And that capacity is not automatic. It's developed. This is where response enters the picture. A response is not calmness. It's not emotional neutrality. It's not the absence of feeling. A response is what happens when emotional activation is present, but awareness arrives before behavior, even briefly, even imperfectly. The difference between reactivity and response can be a matter of seconds, sometimes less. But that sliver of time changes everything. Because when awareness enters the sequence, emotion no longer dictates behavior, it informs it. In a responsive state, the person still feels anger, fear, hurt, or urgency, but they are no longer inside it. They can observe it. They can feel the impulse without obeying it. They can notice the story forming without becoming fused to it. And in that moment, behavior becomes authored rather than discharged. This is why emotional regulation is so often misunderstood. Regulation is not about suppression. It's not about controlling feelings or minimizing emotional life. Regulation is about delaying action long enough for awareness to enter the system. And that delay is uncomfortable. For many of us, it feels like a physical itch you're not allowed to scratch. It feels like holding your breath while your lungs demand air. When we ask the nervous system to pause mid activation, we're not just being patient, we're sitting inside a fire without running for the exit.
Why do some people walk into a room and make it better, while others seem to leave emotional wreckage in their wake? The Emotionally Intelligent Life: What It Looks Like, What It Doesn't, and How to Grow It by R.J. Starr is the book that finally answers that question with psychological depth and real-world clarity. It goes beyond the buzzword of emotional intelligence to show what it actually looks like in the heat of everyday life, and what it doesn't look like when we're on autopilot. In this grounded, deeply practical guide, psychology professor R.J. Starr takes you through emotionally charged moments, from work feedback to relationship conflict, boundary setting to burnout, pairing emotionally unintelligent responses with their emotionally intelligent counterparts so you can see, feel, and learn the difference. You'll discover emotional intelligence isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you grow through practice, reflection, and presence. Whether you're a leader, a partner, a parent, or simply someone who wants to show up with more integrity and less reactivity, this book meets you where you are and walks with you toward who you want to become. The Emotionally Intelligent Life will change how you engage with your feelings, with others, and with the emotional terrain of your everyday world. Available worldwide in bookstores everywhere and online. Get your copy now and start living with greater emotional clarity, connection, and integrity.
We have to be honest about this. The reason we react is not because we're bad. It's because reacting provides immediate, intoxicating relief from the pressure of feeling. One of the most overlooked facts in psychology is that unregulated emotion seeks discharge. When the nervous system is activated, it wants resolution, movement, expression, release. The pause required for response interrupts that momentum. It asks the system to tolerate tension without resolution. This is why people say things like, "I know I shouldn't react, but I just can't sit with it." What they're describing is not a moral failure. It's a lack of tolerance for emotional activation without action. That tolerance is learned, and it's learned slowly. Children do not begin life with it. Early development is dominated by reactivity. Infants and young children feel and act in near simultaneity. Distress becomes crying. Frustration becomes throwing. Fear becomes clinging. This is not dysfunction, it's developmental reality. Over time, with sufficient safety and modeling, the nervous system begins to learn that feeling does not require immediate action, that distress can rise and fall without catastrophe, that emotion can be experienced internally without being acted out externally. But when development is disrupted, when environments are chaotic, invalidating, or overwhelming, this learning can stall. The person grows older, but the nervous system remains reactive. Emotion continues to move directly into behavior. And because adult behavior carries more consequence than childhood behavior, the costs accumulate. Relationships suffer. Work becomes volatile. Regret becomes familiar. Patterns repeat. What's striking is how often people interpret these patterns as identity. They say things like, that's just how I am. I'm emotional. I'm reactive. I have a temper. I'm anxious. I overthink. But these are not traits in the way people imagine them. They're descriptions of regulation capacity. Think of it like a circuit breaker. If your kitchen lights go out every time you turn on the toaster, you don't say the house is stupid or broken. You recognize that the wiring is carrying more current than it was built to handle. When we call ourselves hot-headed or too sensitive, we're blaming the house for the wiring. The work is not to change who you are. It's to upgrade the system's ability to hold the current. When regulation is low, emotion governs behavior. When regulation increases, emotion becomes information rather than command. This is why insight alone rarely changes behavior. People often know exactly what they should do. They know their patterns. They understand their triggers. They can explain their history in detail. And yet, in the moment of activation, all of that knowledge disappears. That's not because insight is useless. It's because insight cannot operate in a reactive nervous system. Awareness requires access, and access is blocked when emotional urgency dominates. The work, then, is not to eliminate emotion, but to widen the window between feeling and action, to cultivate the capacity to pause, to build tolerance for activation without discharge. This does not happen through willpower. It happens through repetition. Each time a person feels the urge to react and does not act immediately, something subtle but very important occurs. The nervous system learns that activation does not equal danger. That intensity can be survived. That emotion can peak and fall without expression. The system begins to decouple feeling from action. At first, this feels unnatural, even wrong. People often mistake the pause for suppression. They worry that if they don't act, they're betraying themselves or being dishonest. But honesty is not the same as immediacy. Feeling something does not obligate expression. Over time, the pause becomes less threatening. Awareness arrives more easily. The sense of urgency softens. And what replaces reactivity is not numbness, but clarity. This is where emotional freedom emerges. Emotional freedom does not mean feeling less. It means being less governed by what you feel. Emotion still arises, sometimes powerfully, but it no longer hijacks behavior. The person can choose how to act rather than being compelled to act. This is why the distinction between reactivity and response is not merely psychological. It's existential. It determines whether a person lives in authorship or compulsion. Reactive behavior is always externally governed. It's shaped by circumstances, by other people's actions, by internal surges the person does not control. Responsive behavior is internally governed. It reflects agency. Agency is not about dominance or control. It's about coherence. It's about acting in ways that make sense over time, ways that align with values rather than impulses. One of the quiet tragedies of reactive living is that it fragments identity. When behavior is governed by fluctuating emotional states, people begin to feel inconsistent. They say things they later regret. They act in ways that do not align with who they believe themselves to be. They look back and think, that wasn't really me, but it was them. It was just them without regulation. Response restores continuity. It allows a person to recognize themselves in their actions, to feel ownership rather than apology, to move through life with fewer fractures between intention and behavior. This does not mean life becomes easy. Emotion does not disappear. Conflict still arises. Pain still registers. Loss still hurts. But the person is no longer dragged through experience by emotional currents they cannot interrupt. They can stand inside feeling without being overtaken by it, and that changes everything. Many people spend their lives trying to change how they feel, believing that emotional relief will bring behavioral change. But more often, behavioral change comes first. When people learn to respond rather than react, their emotional lives reorganize. Feelings become less overwhelming because they're no longer fused with action. The nervous system no longer treats emotion as an emergency. This is why regulation is not repression, it's integration. To integrate emotion is not to silence it, it's to hold it within a larger field of awareness, to let it speak without letting it dictate. And that capacity, once developed, reshapes relationships. Conversations slow down. Conflicts become navigable. Apologies become rarer, and when they occur, they're cleaner. Decisions feel less rushed. Regret loses its grip. Not because the person has become calmer, but because they have become freer. So the question is not whether you feel strongly. The question is what happens next. Does emotion move directly into behavior, or does awareness enter the sequence? Is there space between feeling and action, or does urgency collapse that space instantly? These are not abstract questions. They are lived daily. In messages you send or do not send. In words you choose or withhold. In the 3-second inhale before you answer a sharp comment. In the decision to put the phone in the other room when your hands are typing faster than your judgment. In that tiny, quiet internal wait right before the wave breaks. And the most important thing to understand is this. The ability to respond rather than react is not a trait you either have or you don't have. It's a capacity you can grow, one pause at a time.
That wraps up this episode of The Psychology of Us with Professor R.J. Starr. Each conversation is a step toward greater understanding of ourselves, each other, and the forces that shape human behavior. Listeners are invited to continue the conversation by sharing their thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions at profrjstarr@outlook.com. Every message helps shape future episodes, ensuring the discussions remain relevant, thought-provoking, and meaningful. For those who find value in these explorations, subscribing and leaving a review is a great way to support the podcast and bring these insights to a wider audience. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring the psychology of us.